This week on American Farm and Country Today, Doc Sanders introduces us to Jill Michael and Jean Gailey from Cedar Bog, and we discuss protective wetlands. Also, Doc Sanders catches up with Joe Biesecker as he introduces us to the legend of John Chapman, better known as Johnny Appleseed. All this week on American Farm and Country Today.
Hi, I'm Doc Sanders. We have a very unique subject for you today, and I have with me Jill Michael. We are at Cedar Bog in southern Champaign County, Ohio. Jill, tell us a little bit about Cedar Bog.
Cedar Bog is a very unique biodiversity spot here in Ohio. We are a national natural landmark and also a state nature preserve. One of the most unique things about Cedar Bog is right here where we're at right now. We are standing in Ohio in the ice ages. Yes, this is the type of environment that the mastodons and the mammoths would just slowly be grazing their way through. The plants that you see along the base are primarily sedges. We are in a sedge meadow. We also have surrounding us the white cedar trees and the swamp birches. And this is just a picture of what Ohio used to look like prior to the glaciers coming through.
So, Jill, how did Cedar Bog come about? Obviously, most people would have treated this as farmland or whatever, and it used to be a lot bigger than it is now. But tell me a little bit about how Cedar Bog came to be.
The last glacier that came through this area, the Wisconsinian, hit an area just north of here called Bell Fountain, Ohio, and sent two fingers down this direction. One of the giant sheets of ice came through this particular area, and as the ice melted and the glacier meltwater continued, we actually became in direct contact with the underground aquifer. The underground aquifer is the water that runs underneath this area. So we have constant 55-degree water coming up throughout this entire area. We are actually not a bog, we are a fen, and that's where a fresh, clean water comes up from underneath, bubbles up through the gravel and silt and an area called marl, and comes up through the area. We have the sedges that grow up, and then anything that is debris that's on the top is carried away via a creek to the Mad River, onto the Miami River, the Ohio River, and then into the Gulf of Mexico. So where you are right now, we have constant 55-degree temperature coming up. So it's almost like we have our own air conditioning in the summertime and our own heat in the winter. So plants that could normally not exist in this kind of an environment, for example, in this particular state, can exist here in Cedar Bog because we have a very, very special environment. Also, the plants that live here have to be able to tolerate wet feed all the time and a certain pH.
And so we're at a fen, if you will, and it is ecologically very important to a watershed. Is that not true?
Absolutely. And wetlands are so important to our world today. First and foremost, they help prevent floods. They work like giant sponges, and they just absorb and absorb and absorb when we have heavy rains, and then gradually release the water back out into the system. Also, wetlands are very important because they help clean and purify our water. They also serve as nurseries for insects and birds and reptiles and amphibians, and they are just a very critical ecosystem in the United States today. That's why it's so important that we protect and preserve the wetlands that are remaining in the United States.
So originally there's wetlands on many of the rivers across the country and the like, and as I understand, California first, and Ohio was basically, if you'll call it that, notorious for converting wetlands into farmland. However, that's changing.
Yes, because as things have evolved and the scientists have realized the absolute crucial importance of wetlands, people have stepped in to help protect the wetlands that we have remaining. And if anyone was to think of destroying an area of wetland, they must replace a wetland in response to that.
And Ohio has had a very active effort, I think, and it is also California, to restore those.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And one example of how wetlands were destroyed was this area was originally 7,000 acres. We now have 442 acres that is preserved.
And of course, if you look at it from another angle, the whole area of southern Champaign County was part of this. And of course, today, much of it is farmed, but some of it is being restored.
Yes, that is true, Don. That is true. We do have a lot of farmland here that was originally wetlands.
We're with Gene Gailey at Cedar Bog. Gene is naturalist emeritus, if you will, and is our walking encyclopedia about things that go on at Cedar Bog. Tell us a little bit about the area we're in, would you, Gene?
Okay. This area is a fen meadow. Most of what you see here are grass that look like grasses are not. They're called sedges. And the way you tell that is if you feel the base of the stem and it's triangular, it's a sedge, because sedges have edges. You'll also notice that our cedar trees that outline the edges are without leaves or branches about 5 feet off the ground. And that is caused by the white-tailed deer browse line here. As in many nature preserves in this part of the United States, we have a very large population of white-tailed deer, which is starting to be a problem in nature preserves. This is also a good place to come on a sunny day to see the elfin skimmer. This is the smallest dragonfly in North America. It is very rare, and this is one of the few places that you can actually come and see them on a good sunny day. This is an area that also has many endangered things living in it. We have 60 different kinds of sedges growing here, and because sedges grow in wetlands and we have lost so many, a lot of those are endangered. We also have other animals that live out here. If you come here in the spring, you'll hear the American toad. And at the same time, we also have things that you're probably quite familiar with, like raccoons and possums. They like to get to visit Cedar Bog, and they live here as well. And we also have mink in Cedar Bog, and it's not unusual, especially over along the west branch of the creek, to see mink walking along the trail with you.
You know, the thing is, I can remember Dr. Fredericks, I believe, classified as many species as she could here, and I think the number is well over 500.
Last count we did when I checked our lists, the ones that have been verified and documented and the specimens are on file with the Ohio Historical Society or the Department of Natural Resources, we have over 630. We also have orchids in Ohio, and one of the orchids that you will see here the end of May and the beginning of June is the Showy lady slipper orchid, and it is well worth the visit just to come see our display. This past year and in the summer, we had over 100 different stems at one time right here from this platform that you could see. It's the largest of the lady slipper orchids found in North America, and we are one of the few places where you can get up close and personal without having to get off our boardwalk to see them.
And you know, the other thing is, to keep this a little bit X-rated, is that tell us about the trilling toads and frogs and so forth.
Every March or April, when we have the first night where it rains and it stays above 60 degrees, the toads come out. This is the American toad, and they come out and they trill, and this is the males trying to attract the females. And what happens is it all happens. It can take as few as 24 hours like it did this year, or it can go on for 2 or 3 days. You come out here and it sounds like just a whole bunch of people trilling, and that's what it is. It's the male toads trying to attract the females. And then they lay their eggs out here where we have shallow water. This is a good place for them to do that because there aren't any fish to eat the eggs. And the tadpoles have the unique task of trying to mature and come out as small little toads before the water dries up.
You heard it here, folks. X-rated in Cedar Bog. Gene promised me we'd see some carnivorous plants, and I was picturing that we were going to have a man-eating plant out here, and I wanted to make sure that it got the cameraman or our producer or somebody instead of me. But at any rate, as I find out, the carnivorous plants here are different. Gene, tell us about them.
Well, we have two kinds of carnivorous plants at Cedar Bog. One of them is round-leafed sundew, which has sticky hairs, and much like a Venus flytrap, it traps the animals in the stickiness and then very slowly closes it. The whole plant is about the size of a quarter, and it's feeding off things like small mosquitoes and ants and small flies. We have another one that is called Bladder Wart, and the Bladderworts are plants that have tiny little pouches on their roots, and the pouches are down in the water and in the muck, and literally as things like water bears and water fleas, which are small microscopic organisms, come by, they suck them in. And they use these for food because living in a wetland isn't always the best place to be. The water keeps flowing through here and washing away the nutrients. And so they have to get their food from somewhere, and in addition to putting out green leaves, they also put out instruments of collection for other organisms to feed themselves with.
And are there lots of these carnivorous plants, or I mean, do we think of whole meadows of that sort of thing, or is it just occasionally something that like that develops?
Well, we don't have a whole meadow of them. We have a few here and there. We have 3 kinds of bladderworts and only 1 kind of sundew, and they're rather rare in the state of Ohio because, once again, they're confined to living in wetlands, which are a threatened environment in the entire United States.